now. And just a couple things to keep in mind. If you have questions as we go through today's presentation, please feel free to drop those in the chat box, or if you'd like to use in your bar across the bottom of your screen there under reactions, the raise hand feature, that's fine too. We will be having a little bit of discussion today, so if you want to participate in that by the chat box or by unmuting yourself and talking, either is fine. We have a little poll that we're going to pose to you during the session, and then we've got a brief evaluation poll at the end as well to get some feedback from you on the session. I think that's everything. Ricardo, Emma, am I missing anything?
Just like to reemphasize that this is like a fun choose your own adventure book where the whole reaction determines the steps that we take in the presentation.
True, it does. All right, so with that, we're going to get started. I'm going to share my screen here so everybody can see the slides. And just as a reminder, if you missed the first session or first couple of sessions, we're happy you're here now. You're still going to find value in the presentation today. And we will be sending out the replay links for all three sessions actually after today's session. So additionally, if you have somebody on your team who wasn't able to join and you think they would get value from this series, please feel free to share those replay links with them. The more the merrier in that case. Always happy when people can benefit from the recordings of these sessions. So briefly, again, always like to start with a little bit about Decision Associates. So my name is Amanda Kaczurka. I'm the project manager for Decision Associates. We also have Emma Steele on the call, who is a junior consultant with us. A little bit about Ricardo is coming in a moment when he introduces himself, because he's going to be our main presenter again today. So Decision Associates, we're a business consulting firm located here in Erie, Pennsylvania. We have our mission and vision there at the bottom of the screen, which are recently revamped as we are celebrating our 40th year in business this year. Yay, so exciting. And then along the right-hand side of the screen there, you will see some of the services that we offer. So lots of different areas. This webinar focused on strategic foresight is a newer service offering, or updated service offering, I guess you could say. And so we're excited to have Ricardo as part of the team as our strategic foresight advisor, helping navigate this landscape and this service. So without further ado, Ricardo, if you want to cover the agenda for today and then just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I hope everyone's having a swaggerlicious start to their Thursday morning. This is going to be my favorite session because we're going to dive into how strategic foresight actually looks into practice. Half of CEOs surveyed by PricewaterhouseCoopers in 2024 expressed concern that their companies might not survive the next decade without strategic changes that anticipate and adapt to future trends. And here at Decision Associates, we've witnessed how the crucial gap between actionable foresight and strategic decision-making continues, despite technological advancements over the past decade. In this webinar series, we've explored why this gap exists and what we need to do to bridge that gap. And now, in this webinar, part 3, having discussed both the importance of anticipating change to exceed our objectives and the capabilities needed to develop such foresight, today's session will focus on how to implement strategic foresight within your organization and the results that you can expect. Recently, the World Economic Forum published results from a survey of strategic foresight practices across 400 different companies. They identified the winning combination for utilizing strategic foresight to achieve specific outcomes. And fortunately, those results do reinforce the best practices that we'll share today and throughout this webinar series. They link strategic foresight to organizational goals through our 4-step process. This process enables us to predict emerging demands, proact with innovative solutions, perform with precision, and outpace future challenges. Today, we'll walk through how to implement these 4 steps so that you'll never be caught off guard in your business journey, no matter what challenges are ahead, because everyone will be trying to keep up with you and your game-changing 4-step process. Next slide, please. Okay. So just a quick about me. I've been involved in pioneering the fields of intelligence and strategic foresight over the past decade. with experience on both sides of the desk as a consultant and as an internal employee, starting and scale forward-looking decision capabilities across companies of all shapes and sizes. Back in 2010, when I was still an undergraduate student at the University of South Florida, the federal government was engaging in nationwide forecasting competitions to try to figure out what sets apart an average forecaster from an exceptional forecaster. And I happened to score high on all of their exams. So they invited me to work in Washington, D.C. as a federal intelligence analyst. And that was fun and good and everything. But I saw this opportunity to take those same techniques and methodologies and apply them to the private sector. So instead of figuring out what's going to happen next in Libya or in Russia, we can take those same methodologies to predict what's going to happen next in precision machining, or which technology will replace passwords. Is it going to be biometrics, user and entity behavior analytics, or something else? And my breakout moment was really in 2014 when I was a graduate student at Mercyhurst University in Erie, Pennsylvania, because one of the steps that we'll go over today, I invented there for the first time. And there were companies from all over, like Parker Hannifin and Target Corporation, that were asking me a lot of questions and taking copious notes on the process that I evolved. And the process that we'll go over again has been reiterated from those days based off of my experience since then, applying them to many different organizations across many different sizes, including many companies in Northwest Pennsylvania and in Western New York. I've been certified by the US Department of Labor and recognized as a pioneer in this field that's leading the charge in how to apply strategic foresight within private sector companies. So we can move on now. Just a quick reminder on what is strategic foresight. It's about being able to anticipate change early enough to build a competitive edge. The important thing to keep in mind here before we move on is that it's not about passively making predictions about the future. It's about anticipating the future, anticipating change, and incorporating those insights into our most pivotal business decisions. So as an example, before we make that $1 million investment into a new product or a new process, let's anticipate the outcome and the competitive and market dynamics that are likely to react to our play. And this is best manifested through the 4-step framework that works for companies of all sizes and industries and for universal and critical use cases that we'll go over on the next slide. So we went over this last session, where we're predicting emerging markets, we're proacting with innovative solutions, we're performing with precision across targeted verticals, personas, and geographies, and we're outpacing future challenges through robust scenario planning. And then the next slide goes over the decision tree about determining where to begin. One of my key perspectives and challenges to everybody within the strategic foresight space is that it's possible to unlock the value of strategic foresight within 10 hours by targeting exactly where within the business it makes more sense to apply the strategic foresight perspective. So here within this decision tree, based off of the most pivotal need of the organization, ROI can be accelerated from strategic foresight activities. Each of these steps has a full decision model and also building blocks, because depending on the company and where they are in their planning life cycle and on their alignment about what the future of their organization looks like, it may or may not make sense to start with a fully hashed out decisioning model, and perhaps a more prerequisite step for discussion makes more sense for them. So each of these, predict, proact, perform, and outpace, have a full decisioning model methodology and also iterative building blocks that can be built in less than 10 hours if needed for greater discussion and alignment across the entire organization. So now we're going to go into detailed examples of each. These are real world scenarios, but with anonymized company names and such. So this first one, predict. Predict is the best use case for a company trying to determine in which market segments they should either enter in next or expand in. At a high level, at any given time, there's lots of directions that we can potentially go. But what we would like to be able to do is go in the direction where we can become either the #1 or the #2 solution for our customers, or do the best that we can, given where we are in the marketplace with our existing resources. Because there's so many industries converging now, sometimes the line between a supplier, a competitor, and a customer are more blurred now than they were maybe 10 to 15 years ago. And depending on the market life cycle, there'll be different pockets of growth. And either building, acquiring, or partnering with a company to go after a segment might make most sense. So here on the right-hand side, what we see is a depiction of different market segments that are related to the company in the example, Precision Incorporated. And their existing core is the honeycombs in orange, stainless machining, heat treating, and carbon steel machining. And the decision modeling and the factors that we use to come up with these scores suggest that, for instance, medical plastics, aluminum machining, and welding services are built opportunities, whereas coding technology is an acquiring or emerging opportunity, and assembly makes the most sense to partner, and brass machining and stamping are not suggested. These scores take into account both market potential, but also their ability to serve. And market timing is primarily what determines whether it makes most sense to build, acquire, or partner. Because it's all great if there's a great opportunity out there in the marketplace, but depending on the company's capabilities, there may be a scenario where by the time they build out the capability, the market would have moved on and it's too late. So in those cases, market timing relates more to partnering. And a similar case is with acquiring. Maybe there's a great opportunity out there that scores high, but it's just out of reach with current capabilities or partnerships. So an acquisition or a joint venture would make the most sense there. And the hexagon here in the honeycombs is representative of the output of the full decisioning model for the predict step. The data that we see below, where there's different buckets and below average, average, and above average growth rates, speak to the pockets of growth within those specific market segments. This is critical because there's lots of market research reports out there that can say something like the growth rate for machining is 10 to 15%. But we need to be able to unpack that a little bit to determine where we are as a company and where the most opportunities are. And this was the same premise that we were able to use at Decision Associates to help double the value of a company based in Pittsburgh when their owner was looking to sell the company, where industry experts and popular news media said that their industry was declining at maybe even a -5 to -10% growth rate. But our modeling was able to prove to them, to the acquirer, and to various organizations around the world that for their specific pocket and where they were was actually a positive 10 to 15% growth rate. And that's the level of nuance that we need to be able to articulate anytime we do a decisioning model like this, related to strategic foresight and related to allocating significant business resources to the segments that we wish to go after. So this model, to sum it up, it's about prioritizing the best fit growth to grow effectively and sustainably across a spectrum of all the options that we can consider. Move on to the next one. So PROACT. This one is near and dear to my heart because it was the first of the 4 steps that I invented back in 2013. So this relates to product roadmap and positioning our products and ourselves against the competition by measuring different classes of variables. Back in 2013, the first application of this I did for Netflix and the video streaming industry back when I was still a graduate student at Mercer University. And my model was able to predict that Disney Plus would become a competitor 3 years before they became a competitor. And the way that this model was able to do this was by being able to accurately measure which capabilities are game changers, which are creating advantage, which are being challenged, and which are qualifiers. The way to interpret this would be that qualifiers are capabilities that are needed just to be taken seriously by the marketplace. If you take a manufacturer of consumer packaged goods, for example, perhaps being certified by a particular industry is a qualifier. And if it's a qualifier and if it's needed to be taken seriously by the marketplace, perhaps it shouldn't be marketed or spoken about as much when we're out talking to prospects because it's something that everybody has and it's not a source of competitive advantage. Creating advantage are the capabilities that might not be very differentiated today, but they will be in the future. An example of this in the video streaming market example was, and back in 2014, 4K streaming was seen as the big game changer. But the concept of having an original library of content through a company's own film studio was still something that didn't gain traction within the marketplace yet. And this was critical for Netflix to be able to anticipate Disney Plus's entry in the marketplace and not go out of business when Disney Plus built their own original content library on their own video streaming service and no longer licensed their shows to Netflix. More recently, for a company with approximately $10 million in revenue, I applied this model to. And in their particular case, they were looking to figure out what they needed to do to best position their product roadmap and themselves when a much larger global company was going to build a new operational facility within their market. And counterintuitively, what the model showed was that partnering with another competitor of theirs that was more localized and regionals was the best bet for success. It's almost like some classical magazines and cartoons like Superman, sometimes Superman and Lex Luthor. They're deadly enemies, but they will team up to fight against a deadly threat. And that's precisely what this setup company did. So on this upper right-hand side, that's the full decisioning model for the PROACT step, where we're measuring the competitive landscape on an x-axis and a y-axis, and we're showing different companies. In this particular example, the position of Components Limited Liability Corp is where they're at compared to clusters of competitors that here are described as green tech assemblers or traditional integrators. Each of these clusters of competitors have their own strengths and weaknesses, and the arrows forecast in which direction their product roadmap and competitive positioning will go into to best take advantage of emerging trends towards becoming game changers and creative advantage capabilities. And for this particular case, the prescription that the model provides is that the company Components LLC should prioritize their product roadmap around blockchain traceability, AI quality control, and predictive inventory management. In some cases, the building block is enough for a company to become unstuck. They don't necessarily need the full PROACT decisioning model. And in that case, the best PROACT building block step is down towards the bottom right, where there's different capabilities and a weighted ranking system for the TechBridge and their green tech assemblers and traditional integrator competitors. This is then a high-level overview of how this model functions and works. And I'll actually be going over the latest iteration of this, incorporating artificial intelligence and machine learning at a global conference next week in Nashville, hosted by the Strategic Consortium of Intelligence Professionals. So this is all cutting-edge stuff that's still being worked on as we speak, not only in the field of strategic foresight, but also in how it's applied across business sectors of all shapes and sizes. We'll go on to the next one. So perform. This speaks to, now that we know which market segments to go after from the predict step and which capabilities to put on our roadmap on the PROACT step, now we speak to across which industry verticals, geographies, and buyer personas do we need to target to get the optimal return on investment across our resources related to marketing, sales, and product. Many times across companies of all sizes, marketing, sales, and products are too spread out across too many different initiatives. And this model is a great way of aligning the go-to-market resources across marketing, sales team allocation, and product development across specific industry verticals and geographies that make the most sense to go after. In this particular case, and the first column here, for the Great Lakes industry verticals, we're measuring different industry verticals that the company can go after: automotive, aerospace and defense, renewable energy, medical devices, and consumer products. And the italicized text go into how many viable prospects there are for that particular industry vertical for the geographical area of focus. And there's a score and a recommendation. The scores and the recommendations point to how high on the priority list the company should consider it. So this, for example, shows that the automotive scored an 88, and that's a high priority expansion. Growth opportunity for renewable energy is a 75, and aerospace and defense and medical devices scored around 80, and it's a strategic investment. It's almost like a fast go, slow go, and no go traffic light model, with consumer electronics seen as a non-priority. Now, somebody could ask, if aerospace and defense and medical devices scored 82 and 80 and renewable energy scored a 75, why is the model showing that renewable energy as a greater growth opportunity than aerospace and defense and medical devices? And the reason is because the score factors in both internal variables of traction, how well is that company currently doing within this industry vertical, as well as external variables of opportunity. But we also have to take into an account not only the score that measures the opportunity and the company's ability to serve, but also how close they are to the company's product portfolio, where maybe due to certifications or to capabilities, the company is better set up to immediately go after renewable energy, whereas aerospace and defense and medical devices might take a little bit more work to get a positive return on investment going after those targeted industry verticals. Can we move on? So outpace. We did some trend analysis work in the first session and touched upon it again on the second session. That speaks to the pre-work and the lower right-hand side. That is a building block to building fully fleshed out scenarios. Initially, this was the more what we would call fluffy or qualitative, but it's becomes much more actionable and tangible and quantitative when we tie it and pair it to the growth forecasts within the organization. So in this particular example, we're saying that the company is on track for their 3-year $150 million target. But based off of the scenario, advanced automation adoption. But there's a 60% chance that instead of that being the scenario of the future, the next 1 to 3 years might show a shift to the precision pioneer scenario. And the signpost that they have to look out for is an uptick for high precision components and a lenient regulatory climate. And if those signposts come to fruition, if they come to be, then the immediate action that the company should take, according to the model, is pivoting towards aerospace and medical devices with closer tolerance machines. The way to build scenario planning is a building block from the trend analysis that we did in session 1 and session 2, where each of the indicators, such as automation surge, green tech, green reg tech, and precision surge, exist on a negative and a positive polarity scale. So in this particular case, there's at least 9 different scenarios that can be developed based off of automation surge being high or being low, paired with green red tech being high and low, and et cetera, et cetera. This is a high-level overview of how scenario planning works. And in many cases, it's harder to tie to our immediate ROI compared to the other steps, but it still has game-changing opportunities, such as the pharmaceutical manufacturer adventure that I went over in the first session, where because the company did scenario planning, they were able to foresee the investments into the regulatory certifications needed 3 years before their competitors did, enabling that they had the cash flow to adopt the emerging regulations in time without potentially going bankrupt or having some other fiscal challenges. We can go on. So now we're on to the poll, the choose your own adventure, on which step we should talk about more further in this webinar. Right, Amanda?
We are indeed. So for those of you who are joining us, I'm going to be launching a poll. You should see that on your screen right now. So we'd love for you to pick which of the 4 strategic foresight steps is most relevant. So we understand that there may be more than one in your case, but we're looking for the one that is most relevant to overcoming your organization's current challenges. So is it predict, understanding customers' wants and needs, proact, planning product or service offerings that stand out, perform, picking best areas to focus your efforts, or outpace, being ready to adapt to new scenarios before they occur? So take a second and just submit your response to that. And then we're going to, depending on the responses, uh, have a little bit of discussion here. So make your selection. Righty, see one proact and one perform. Awesome.
Ooh, we might need a tiebreaker.
We've got an outpace. We've got one of each except predict. All right, I'm going to end the poll here in 3, 2, 1. All right, so we have 2 votes for outpace, 1 for proact, and 1 for perform. So Ricardo, do you want to start with outpace?
Yes,
That
so
got
we
the
have a
most
guiding
votes.
conversation question for each answer, and everyone will get the guiding questions for each step at the end of this webinar as well.
Mhm.
So, yep, so in this case, if you set out pace, we have to think about a time when you were blindsided by a competitor or a market shift, or maybe you were the one leading the disruption, and what lessons were taken away from that experience, and how you can apply that to ensure that you remain the disruptor rather than the disrupted. So we want to give people a chance to ponder on this and reflect so that we can chat about some of the examples as well. And I can bring my own as well.
Perfect. So we'll give you a minute or two to think about the answer to that question. So again, the question is, think about a time when you were blindsided by a competitor or market shift, or when you were the one leading the disruption, and what lessons can you apply to ensure that you remain the disruptor rather than the disrupted? I love this question. So think a little bit about your answer, and then in just a minute here, we're going to ask for some sharing. Should I play the Jeopardy theme song right now?
Yes, yes, why not? All right, I think we're ready to share war stories from the trenches.
All right,
And,
so if you said outpace to the poll question and you'd like to share a reflection on this question, feel free to unmute yourself and share with us what came to mind.
Hi, this is American Tenant.
Yeah.
Hello. Recently, we've had some price increases from for our pricing of zinc, which is a global market, due to the war, Russia's war with the Ukraine, and different tariffs that are being placed by government agencies and so forth. So we were not very prepared for that pricing going up over the last year. We have been able to shift and explain that to our customers so we could pass on some of those price increases. So it's been a little trying at times. But that stuff is totally out of our control as far as what the government does, causing price increasing.
That reminds me, yes, of a very key scenario. Back when I was in Washington, D.C., I met an office where all they do is try to come up with high impact, low probability events that can disrupt the market. And things like political climate and political conflicts around the world were definitely some of them that they brainstormed and came up with. And this also comes to mind, another example I thought of, where a provider of, let's say, SMS messaging had a competitor that came in and decided to make their main product a loss leader for them to try to get some of their customers to move over due to the new product now that is being sold at below cost to try to get in more. And the company was a little bit unprepared for that. And ultimately how they ended up responding was creating new pricing bundling options with value add services. So I just refreshed my memory on that. Thank you so much for sharing.
All right, the other group or person that selected Outpace, would you like to share anything about why you selected that and what the situation was and what lessons you've learned from that experience? If you want to drop it in the chat box, feel free to do that as well. And in the meantime, Ricardo, is there anything else you want to share about that particular question?
Just that in my experience, many times, this is true with all of us, right? It's easier or it's more attractive to solve a pain than to buy a vitamin. Like painkillers sell more than vitamins. And the way that I see this manifest is that many times organizations wait until there's a problem to start thinking about foresight, when really the best time to think about foresight is when you're the market leader, everything is going up, profit margins are going up, because we want to find a way to maintain that scenario and anticipate different things that could occur.
Great. So I know we had some folks who also said proact and perform. Predict was the only one that didn't have any selection. So if you selected proact, the question is here up on the screen. What product or service features could your organization pioneer that may not be widely accepted now, but could be a source of competitive advantage and open new opportunities in the future? So again, if you selected proact and you want to share, feel free to either unmute yourself or drop something in the chat. And Ricardo, while we wait for that, anything to share on that one?
Yes, for a while, electric vehicles and battery manufacturing was seen as the wave of the future, going to replace petrol engines and such. But kind of what I'm seeing now in different projects and in different analyses that I do is that perhaps the way forward is hydrogen engines and natural gas as a stepping stone. Natural gas engines widely adopted, used for buses and large scale transportation. And there's different companies out there that are challenging the EV, electric vehicle companies, and the traditional petrol companies too, with hydrogen-enabled motors. At the moment, these hydrogen-enabled motors are mostly limited to, let's say, heavy trucking and driverless applications for plowing unmanned vehicles and like airspace fields and airport fields. I was at an investment dinner last week where a startup that's building a driverless technology vehicle is creating either an EV or a hydrogen-based motor for driverless snowplows for airports.
Super interesting. Let's see, we've got,
Yeah, we got something in the chat.
yes, Terry, who's a member of our team here at DA. He's saying AI comes to mind related to our own DA services here. Do we have the skill set within our staff to properly advise, and when do we need to learn it or acquire it? That's a great point, Terry. And actually, I just, coming off of 3 days attending the SHRM Talent Conference for this year. It's the Society for Human Resources Management, for those who aren't familiar, and they put on a conference every year specific to talent. So that's talent development, retention, recruitment, all of those things. And AI was a huge topic this year, and just talking about specific to AI for the use for use in a learning and development setting. You know, thinking about the different types of AI platforms. The presenter that I'm thinking of, talked about some different ad hoc applications. You know, for AI and how you can incorporate that into you know, structured learning models or self-paced learning models, and it was really interesting. So my head's in the same place, Terry. I'm thinking a lot about that as well. Ricardo, I know AI is a huge topic, so any thoughts on that as it relates to especially ProAct?
Yes, I'm touching on this next week at an AI conference as well, but I'd like to find a way to reverse the trend of within popular culture and mainstream news, people talking about AI as a buzzword. So like a major consulting firm, a global consulting firm, for example, said that they're using AI for talent management and to better allocate human resources. But using AI is very superfluous.
Mm-hmm.
I challenge them on LinkedIn and on various channels. Can you please tell me more about how you're using AI? Are you just going to ChatGPT and typing in something? Are
Mm-hmm.
you building a supervised machine learning model? Are you creating a new data set using deep learning? Or are you building an agent-based modeling simulation? Any four of these cases have their own implications for strategic decision-making as well as ethics. And while I certainly don't expect everybody to know these differences, the person who's advocating for the service should at least be able to touch on what their process is and what the implications are for the business that they're pitching it to.
Definitely. I completely agree. There was a lot of mention of using AI throughout various human resources processes at the conference. But again, not everybody was overly specific about exactly how they're doing that. So, you know, to your point, is it, you know, using ChatGPT to create job descriptions, which makes me cringe a little bit, but that's another topic for another day. Um, so I know we had someone who said perform. So again, just like with the other two, if you'd like to share anything either in the chat or unmute yourself, feel free to do that. Otherwise, Ricardo, what can you tell us about the perform step and the answer to that question?
I think perform is very critical when there's 2 to 3 or 4 to 5 opportunities that on paper all look like very attractive opportunities. And a company needs assistance on determining of those 4 or 5. We can't go after all of them. Which one truly makes the most sense to go after as option 1 and option 2? This can relate to industry verticals, like should we try to market towards automotive or aerospace and defense or heavy construction? Or it can also turn into geography, where we have a facility, let's say in Northwest PA, and we can either open a new facility in Rochester or in Columbus. We can do one or the other, but not both. Which one of those truly makes the most sense? Perform is something that can assist with that.
Perfect. And then I feel like, just, you know, for the sake of the example and the discussion, it would be helpful, even though no one selected predict, it might be helpful for you to share something about the answer with that question as well.
Yeah, so many times for the predict step, especially when we talk about build, buy, or partner, the thought process immediately goes to a larger company buying a smaller company. But it's also very viable for a smaller company that's not in a position to buy another company to think about the buy step as well, because it could make them more attractive either to eventually be bought one day, or if that's not on the table at all, at least be able to predict what would happen if one of their similar sized competitors was bought by a competitor and what the implications are for their strategy and their roadmap.
Awesome, thank you. And Deb dropped a comment in the chat box as well. She said, I'm thinking with Proact that the competitive advantage analysis is the most important, being proactive to build upon your strengths and capabilities versus being reactive to your competition and being first to market. And that's really, I think, one of the great things about this entire topic of strategic foresight, right, is the opportunity to put yourself in a really positive competitive advantage position, being able to understand what's coming down the pipeline, how it's going to impact your organization. Is it an opportunity? Is it a risk? And then determining what the best steps are for moving forward, kind of similar to the example that we gave, I think was that last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, with the pharmaceutical company, that positioned themselves really well to be able to deal with some regulatory things that were coming their way and doing that in advance. So yeah, agree for sure, Deb.
Yes, and I'd also add, this reminded me that the output of the Proact step can also be used in pitch decks, where maybe a company is looking for investment, not necessarily from a venture capital firm, but maybe they even just want to get a loan approved from a bank, and they want some help figuring out how can we best articulate the opportunity we see as an organization if it doesn't exist yet. The output of the Proact step with the competitive landscape, data-driven, it is one of many ways of potentially doing that.
Definitely. All right, very good. Well, like we said, we will be sending out those questions for contemplation out in the follow-up email after today's session. So if you didn't have a chance to share today, definitely give yourself some time to reflect on those after today's session and think about your answers. All right, so I'll turn it back over to Ricardo here in a second, but one thing that we wanted to include in this presentation, we've been talking about the strategic foresight concept, and you're going to see organizations promoting this as a service, and Decision Associates is no different. We're in this space as well, thanks to Ricardo. But ultimately, you may not opt to go with us, and that's fine, but we want to make sure that you are equipped to select a good strategic foresight partner, someone who really knows their stuff, who is doing this the right way, because there is a right way to do it. And so we want to just give you some guidance around selecting a strategic foresight partner. Again, obviously, we hope you would go with us, but if you don't, we want to equip you with that information to be able to make a good selection that will work for you. So we're going to talk you through some points. I will also be sending an attachment in the follow-up email today that kind of encompasses all these topics within the form of questions. So these are questions you could potentially pose to a strategic foresight partner, and what to listen for in the answers. So we'll send that out after today's session. But in the meantime, we want to just go through some things to keep an eye out for. So Ricardo, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, this topic is near and dear to me as well, not only because I tend to be a little bit challenging and disruptive, but also because my father is an owner of a small business as well. Growing up, I saw his company grow from him being an owner-operator of his own dumpster semi-trailer truck to eventually having a fleet of 50 trucks over 3 locations. And I was the only son that was never involved in the business because I was more interested in reading and analyzing and doing all the things we're talking about today. But that just kind of gives me the perspective where whenever any provider of anything is pitching services, it's great to be able to evaluate to make sure that they can truly empower you with the outcomes that you're looking for. And I would extend this not only to foresight services, but to any internal or external partner for any component of data-driven decision-making. I've audited reports from partners of all sizes, from boutique servicing regional communities all the way through global firms like McKinsey and Bain Capital. And here we have the first set of checklist items, if you will, of things to look out for. This slide in particular talks about the reproducibility of analysis. And what does this actually mean? Last webinar, I talked about Michelin star chefs as a metaphor, where providers should be able to provide you their recipe. And the consumer of the recipe should be able to understand it, and if they wanted to, replicate it and come up with a similar result. Otherwise, there's a risk of it not being reproducible, meaning that it's not as well calibrated or as well accurate as we could expect. This also speaks to being able to cite your work. How many PowerPoints have we sat through where somebody says the market is $50 billion, let's say? The first thing I raise my hand, where did you get that number from? And unfortunately, in some cases, the answer is, I'm not sure, or we took that from someone within your organization pointing the finger to somebody else instead of being able to have a citation ready. So being able to have citations is also very important there. We can move on. Okay. This one speaks to strategic options, where it's not a zero-sum game with one correct mathematical solution and the other solutions being incorrect. This is about having a spectrum of different opportunities that are flexible and take into consideration not only the market opportunity, but that individual organization's ability to serve based off of their existing market position. Because it's not enough to say 3 years from now, there's this great opportunity. There also needs to be a way to bridge the existing wins and build some wins based off of today's capabilities, all the way through a 2 to 3 year projection into the future. This also speaks to many different experiences I've had where opportunity A might be worth, let's say, 50 million. Opportunity B might only be worth 20 million. But upon further analysis, the 20 million opportunity becomes more viable because it's closer to the organization's true ability to serve in their strengths. So this level of flexibility is something to keep in mind as well. This one speaks to the fundamental uncertainty of information, where with strategic foresight and related data-driven decision-making methodologies, we're taking a forward-looking view. We're not necessarily taking sales data based on the past and assuming it's going to be the same and making a projection. So when we're doing forward-looking methodologies like this, it's important to be transparent, not only in methodologies, but also with pricings and results and scores. How were they calculated? And ideally, when going over the results, there should be a way for the scores to flexibly change, inviting challenge from the audience. I've been in situations where, let's say, we're looking at 5 different variables that impact the viability of a marketplace. And maybe something that the model ranked it a little bit higher than what the stakeholders are comfortable with. Maybe the regulatory fit or the amount of automotive prospects within the market isn't as important as the model may suggest. So somebody should be able to say, okay, well, let's change this model in real time, discuss it, and see how that changes the results. And that's just important to be able to invite challenge and critique to ultimately make the best decision. And then touching upon this again, reproducibility and transparent methodologies. This goes to the scientific concept of falsifiability, where instead of trying to prove something to be right, we're actively trying to disprove everything and then only tentatively accepting for further investigation the things that can't be immediately disproven. There's several firms, let's see, how can I put this? Where they specialize in stakeholder interviews and getting the perspective of the organization. And this is all very critical. But if the basis of their entire market assessment is based off of stakeholder interviews from the internal organization, that's something that should be highlighted. It's important not to have a single source of failure and rely upon multiple research sources, both open source and proprietary, to come up with the most calibrated findings for your organization. So to wrap up the webinar series, I'm going to sparkle my bow tie here really quick.
I love the light up bow tie.
Yeah, so strategic foresight helps companies recover millions in revenue lost from competitive disadvantages and missed opportunities. This is an emerging field, an emerging practice, where companies of all shapes and sizes are figuring out the best way forward. The process we outlined enables any company to start building a value-producing strategic foresight capability in as little as 10 hours, compounding into a month. Don't hesitate to reach out for any questions or feedback on our presentation. And yep, you have a roadmap to get 80% of the way there, no matter which direction you choose to go into.
You do, that's right. And just to highlight, not to forget about the scenario planning worksheet that we presented in the first session and then used again in the second session. I'll be sending that out again today as an attachment with the follow-up email. So make sure you continue to use that over time. As we said in the last session last week, that's not a static document. That's not intended to be something that you do once and then never look at again. This is something that you're going to be continually updating and changing and adding to. So make sure you keep that document handy. It just really helps you break those opportunities and risks down in a very methodical and easy to digest way. So it just kind of helps take a lot of the guesswork and a lot of the sometimes what feels like stumbling around in the dark, trying to, plan for the future. It takes that kind of scary and convoluted element out of the equation. So before we conclude for the last time here, I'm going to put up another poll, just asking for your thoughts on the series. So there's just 4 quick questions to gauge how well the series met your expectations. What's one thing you're going to do differently as a result of what you learned? What could we have done to make this better? And if you are interested in having a discovery call with Ricardo to further discuss how you can plan for the future using some of the tools that we talked about today and that 4-step process, just drop your email address or even your name in the chat box. If you're registered for the webinar, we have your email address, so just give us your name and he can reach out to schedule some time. So in the meantime, again, just make sure you keep an eye out for that follow-up email today. Will contain the resources that we use with the scenario planning document, and then a couple of other things that I've mentioned. The questions for selecting a strategic foresight partner. Will be providing all of that to you, along with the replay links from today's session. Ricardo, any other final parting thoughts for the group today?
There's lots of opportunities out there that are ripe for disruption, and I'm excited to see how you can apply these tools to make best advantage of them and be a peer that others strive to imitate.
Definitely. All right, very good. So again, we would appreciate you completing the questionnaire that's up on the screen right now before you log off. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, some of you for the entire series, which was awesome, and some of you for 1 or 2 sessions. We're glad you were able to join us. Again, keep an eye out for those replay links. Those will be helpful for you. And I'm also going to simultaneously change the slide here. There's Ricardo's contact information, my contact information, Elizabeth as well. She's the practice manager here at Decision Associates. If you have questions or if you'd like to get connected with any of us, there's our contact information. And then finally, on the last screen, as always, ways to connect with Decision Associates, our LinkedIn and Facebook pages, our website, and then if you scan that lovely QR code in the upper right-hand corner, you can sign up for our quarterly newsletter, Decision Point. Next issue will be coming out in June, so make sure you sign up before we get to that point. So thank you again for joining today. I'll leave the poll up here for another minute or two. And we wish you all a wonderful Thursday and Friday and weekend ahead, and we hope to hear from you soon.